Hi everyone, Teacher Paul with Prezi again. Let's talk about the use of visuals in our classroom videos. In our 7 tips infographic, which is linked below in the description, we mentioned that it's a good idea to use visuals, but we didn't get into the how and why of it, so let's dig in. Each one of these paintings tells a different story. While they are all female appearing faces looking at us, each contains its own narrative and different meaning. There's fear, there's sadness, there's power, there's vulnerability and strength. Each conveys its own meaning. And the visuals that we use in presenting, perhaps not as artistic as these, but each one of those visuals we use conveys meaning also, even the most simple ones like those icons and those graphic clip art. When we create our own presentations and videos, we need to be aware of the visuals we use and how they convey or confuse meaning, especially when placed in the context of verbal and textual content, and especially when it comes to learning. Professor Richard Mayer of the University of California, Santa Barbara established a set of principles based on cognitive research on how pictures, text, and speech interact to produce meaning. Right off the bat, Mayer's research shows that video is the most effective for learning and it reflects his modality principle. And it states that spoken word is easier to comprehend than written word. It just is. However, video's effectiveness is determined by how it employs auditory and visual elements. Those things must come together seamlessly, or meaning can get confounded and really hard for someone to follow, or they might go in a different direction and not comprehend it at all. So I've organized Mayer's work under 3 reasons why we use visuals. There's relevancy. We want to point out things within an image of some sort or add to what we're talking about in a relevant way. We want to add to the meaning of it, and we also want to add to the focus of whatever's presented. Let's start with relevancy and the spatial principle. Use visuals and images that initially support your message before adding anything to the slides. That's aesthetic. Images are sometimes used just to fill the white space, and that's fine. However, it works best if the visuals you choose are relevant to the content and concepts you're addressing. You'll want to alert people as to the relevancy of your points by placing text and images next to each other spatially. See how this GIF and that sort of jellyfish tentacles at work explain what's going on here. Now notice that if I spatially move the jellyfish tentacles to a different location, it becomes harder to make sense of really what's going on. So you want this to be more down here in order for people to get clarity more efficiently. Okay, another way to create relevance is through temporal contiguity. And that's a new word for me. To meet this principle, you want to have the images and narration presented simultaneously, so together rather than one after the other. Learners attempt to mentally correspond words and pictures together, so simultaneously delivery of spoken and visual information is very helpful. Notice the difference between having your content close to each other versus having it separated across time. Going back to this image, here it's together. Now if I place this one up and then this one, the information gets a little lost and we're kind of wondering, well, why? In the case of the text being gone, it leaves us to wonder what's going on with that image and why is it important? And notice when the text is alone, we lack the visual referent to understand what is actually talking about. It's nice to have that added support. So you want to keep textual and visual content together across time. The next element is meaning, and the next principle is coherency. Pictures and other visual components should be placed cleanly on the slide and not clog it up. We all want to go into a neat room, not something that's a big mess. So going back to the jellyfish example, remember how we are focused on the tentacles. To lose coherency, we might violate the coherency principle if we add other information about jellyfish. For instance, we may not want to include information about why a group of jellyfish is called a smack, or how they use propulsion to move forward. That obfuscates or confuses the meaning. Now this Nemo one is perhaps okay, but it's probably a different slide. It would actually work better as a humorous setup for the actual footage of the jellyfish capturing the prey. Okay, on to the redundancy principle. In the redundancy principle, the compounding of the same content through the delivery of sensory channels can create cognitive overload. Consider this simple illustration for how visuals, voiceover, and text can overwhelm cognition.
And if we look closely at how the nematocysts really function in order to catch a prey, then they seem even more marvelous.
Ist das nochmal anwenden?
The nematocysts have extremely sensitive hairs which stick out from the surface. At the slightest contact, they launch a tiny harpoon, which pierces the flesh and delivers the poison directly into the victim's bloodstream.
Okay, notice how the text down below was slightly different than the text that was being spoken. That caused this disequilibrium. Usually people see it word for word like in a subtitle, and that's different. That's a different matter altogether. What you're trying to do in the example that I showed was matching the text to the vocal to the image, and it was hard to get all of that in while we were doing that. Our attention was diverted in different directions. Okay, lastly, let's talk about visual focus. A presenter must employ images that are narrowly focused on a single subject. An ill-organized visual set, and that's what I'm calling the visual plus the text, will divert the audience's attention away from the presenter's main message. So, in this example, we have a table. We've seen tables like this, big tables being presented, but it's really good to highlight the pertinent information just for efficiency's sake, unless your point is you want them to look at the full table and to find things. Otherwise, what you'll want to do is point to the right thing. And in Prezi, you can point, use the arrow, or highlighting. Other methods for focusing include headers, the use of first, second, and third, and like I said, pointing to the key information. Okay, there you have it. I presented a few research-based principles to help you create and position visuals effectively in your learning. Until next time, ready, set, create.